So let's look at how we do that in Python, how we write test code. Okay. So Python, of course, has modules that help us with that. Yes, we could just make any old Python that called our functions and printed nice messages, whether it did what it wanted or not, but there's always a Python library. So I'm shamelessly going to steal from this website, all credit to Semaphore blog, okay? So what are we going to do? We're going to go make a Python virtual environment first. Okay, and there are different Python unit test frameworks. There are two kind of popular ones. One that comes built in Python called unit test, and another third-party one called Pytest. Usually I favor the built-in one, but Pytest is a little easier to learn. It's decently more popular than unit test, and so that's the one we're going to do today. But you could learn the other one quite easily. But because it's not built in, I need to pip install Pytest. Okay, so now we're going to go get some code. And again, I'm just stealing code from the website and walking it through. Okay. Visualize. Okay, so our actual code is going to be really simple. It capitalizes something. Okay. Okay. And I've made a function called test capital case, and I'd like to make sure that this function is working correctly. Okay. So yes, I could like run Python and get the, I can never remember the name, the RIPL, and I could run the test capital case function. But instead, what I'm just gonna go here, I'm just gonna type Pytest. Ta-da! Okay, so this is what Pytest did. Pytest said, okay, I'm in a directory. I'm gonna go find all of your Python files that start with test. I'm gonna assume that's your test code, okay? Yes, we could manually, we could say, hey, please run the Pytest module and point it at test capitalize. Yes, we could do that, but Pytest is actually just a binary that lives on your path once you install it, and it will just look in your current directory for anything named test, and it will go in that module and look for any functions named test at either the beginning or the end of the name, and it will run them. Okay, and if you haven't seen assert basically makes sure that whatever this is true. Okay, my test cases are going to be really simple, but you can make much fancier testing. Sometimes I run a big CSV parser and then I want to check that my CSV file I produced matches something. And so in that case, I might actually commit in like what we call a golden file, and I might do a full file comparison. Okay, but in the cases you see here, we're going to do really simple tests. Okay, so any questions at this point? We're just testing that function. Yeah?
So do we normally not put like capital case in the same file as test capitalize and like import?
It's up to you, okay? And I've heard people make cases for both. Some people say, well, I like having my test code live right beside my other code so that as I'm writing my code, I can see what the function's expected to do, okay? And other people say, well, I like it separate. It's cleaner. I don't want my test code littering my regular code. So you do what the convention is in your project. And if you're starting a new project, you get to make the decision all on your own. So.
If you do put them together, you just have to make sure that it's being tested first.
Yeah.
I guess that was my question. Does it look for the test underscore in the name of the Python script and in like the method, the definition?
Yes.
So it has to be in both?
Well, okay, so you can always point it at whatever file you want. So I can always point it, I don't have a file called this, but then even if I pointed at that, my function names inside would need to be called test something.
Okay, but if you just ran Pytest and it wasn't named under test,
It wouldn't do anything with it. It would just ignore it. Yeah. Okay, so what else is nice here? So they said, hey, maybe, okay, we'd like to test exceptions. If you haven't dealt with exceptions yet in Python, often if we say pass in the wrong data type into a function, we'd like it to raise an exception. We can test that with Pytest code. Okay, so let's see, I'm gonna go add this. Okay, we're gonna add another test function. Oh, now we're actually using something in Pytest, so we need to import it. Okay, and this is kind of weird syntax, but it says basically check that when I call this function, that this block of code raises that exception. I would like, if I pass in an int into capitalize, I would like it to raise the type error exception. Okay, let's try it. Okay, it fails because it says, hey, okay, look. And this is why you use the built-in thing and you don't write your own, because all this nice output. Okay, it says, hey, you know, I tried to run a test. I ran this function. Look, I was right here. Okay. And we tried it with this input. And this is the exception that was raised, attribute error. And you'll notice that's not the exception I was looking for. Okay. And so what they say, let's see, in the interest of time, I'm just going to go steal the code. And they say, hey, maybe how you'd like to code your function is this. So we're going to improve this function. Okay. And so now, okay, this function, it checks, hey, if this object is not a string, then raise a type error. Okay. And so now when we run Pytest, it's happy. Okay, Pytest says, hey, I found 2 items to run. Those are our 2 test functions. And this is just what it does. It does the green dots when it runs each test. The green dot means it worked, and a big capital red E. If I scroll up. Oh, there's just one E here. Where is it? Somewhere. Oh, F. Okay, 1 green dot, 1 F. That's kind of, sometimes if you run someone's test program, you'll see all these green dots. It's running Pytest. Okay. So you can check that your code raises exceptions. Okay. So, are we good? Should we get fancier? Okay. We're going to make a little class. Okay, so they say, hey, we can make this cool test wallet. Grab this. Okay, and I'll grab this. Okay, so let's see, how do I, sometimes I want my terminal over on the side. Okay. So I made this wallet. This is like a wallet to keep money. It's a class, okay? And in the constructor here, you can pass in an initial amount, and if you don't, it defaults to 0. And it keeps track of the balance, okay? And you can add cash or you can spend cash. And these are member functions of the class, okay? And they will adjust the balance. And if you don't have enough money and you try and spend too much money, it raises an exception. And just so you know, you can make your own exceptions in Python. Okay. So it raises an insufficient amount exception. Okay. And you'll just see this if you use Python a lot. In C++, we sometimes use exceptions, but in Python, exceptions are everywhere, and just get used to it. Okay, so we'd like to test that this object works correctly. Okay, so we make a bunch of test functions, and here now they're in a separate file to see it the other way. Okay, we'd like to test some initial amount, so we use a default constructor here and check that the balance is 0. We can check by initializing it with a certain amount. Initialize it with 10, add some money. Now check that the balance is 100. Initialize it with 20, spend 10 and check the balance. Okay. And then we'd like to check that if we initialize it with 0, and try and spend a bunch of money, it raises an exception. Okay. So you'll see we have basically as much test code as we have regular code, or more, I think. But so I can run Pytest again. Okay, and now there's 2 files because my capitalize is still lying around in the directory. Okay, I found 7 items, 5 of them live in here. Bunch of green dots, we're all good. Good, keep going. Okay, so, all right, so then they say, hey, look, we've got a lot of repetition, okay? So let's go here, okay? We're gonna change this, come on, test wallet. Yeah, we're gonna do new stuff here. Okay, so now we're getting a little fancier here. Maybe there's a lot of bookkeeping or maybe you want to do some tests on your pandas data frame, but you don't really want to write the code that reads the CSV and cleans it up every single time for every one of your tests. You'd like to have some kind of reusable code to provide a starting point. So that's what these fixtures do. They kind of set up a starting point environment where you can run a bunch of other tests. So these ones are pretty boring, but we have one, and this is called a decorator when we put it in front of a function. It does do something important here. It basically tells Python, hey, this is a special function that is a Pytest fixture. It just creates an empty wallet. Yeah, I know it's only 1 line of code. We've replaced 1 line with another line, but you can imagine doing lots of work to set up something, okay? Or maybe we have a wallet with some money in it. Then down here in these tests, we can operate on an empty wallet or a wallet. Maybe some alarm bells are going off your head and saying, that's kind of weird syntax. This is just a function argument. What does the name matter? But you can do weird things in Python. And so this name is actually finding a function, finding that test fixture. And so we can basically use the same wallet object to do a bunch of different tests on. Okay. And so that you believe me, we will run it again and it'll work fine. Okay. So these are called fixtures. This is, again, just getting to a common starting point where you can run a bunch of different tests. And you'll notice these are all, even though there's a common starting point, each one runs the code again, okay? It's not like, everyone is operating on a different wallet, okay? It's not like the functions are being run in order on the same wallet. Each time it creates a new wallet object, okay? But it's just moving common code to a place, okay? Okay, so, very good. I don't know that syntax off the top of my head. I gotta Google it, I gotta go look at it and copy it, and that's just, but as long as you know it's there. Okay, we're getting to the end of my stuff here. We do one more thing. Parameterized test functions. Okay. Oh, 2 more things, I lied. I want to do 1 more after this. Okay, so here, I'm going to call the same function, but I'd like to test it with lots of different inputs. Okay, I don't want to make a new function for every set of inputs. Okay, so now I have a test function that takes arguments. Okay, this is new, right? How does that work? you run Pytest, and it's not like you're passing in arguments to the function. So Pytest needs to know what data should it pass in when it runs this function. Okay. And so what I'm going to use this special decorator says, it's called pytest.mark.parameterized. I don't know. This is just what you use. And you can give it the name of arguments, and then you can give it a list of tuples to put in. And so it will call this function twice. One where it will pass in these, and another where it will pass in those. And when you learn about generators, you could put a generator here that calls this 1,000,000 times with different data if you want. Okay. Sorry, generators and list comprehensions was the other, what I meant to say. But you'll see here now there's 9 items, and it expands it out and it runs this one twice. Okay. So sometimes I even do like a dot product where I'll say, hey, I want this parameter to have 3 different items, and this one to have 3, and this one to have 3, and then there's 27 different combinations of inputs, and it does it all. Okay. And you don't have to write all the helper code, it just works. All right. That's it for Pytest that I have. I have one other kind of cool one I'd like to show you. Okay, let's go back to our capitalized function. Have you seen these ever at the start of a Python? This is kind of how we often write documentation for our class. It's called a doc string. We can say, you know, this is a function that capitalizes the first letter of a string. Okay. Okay. And on Wednesday, we'll learn about Sphinx, right? And talk about it, pulls this magic stuff out and builds documentation for you. So there's another Python module, not called Pytest, called doctest, I think. Hopefully I get the name right, otherwise this won't be too exciting. Where you can actually write tests inside the doc string, like you're running this function on the REPL. So I can say, hey, if I capitalize hi, what I should get back is hi. So let's do it wrong first, okay? This one we do have to call directly. Well, that's not what I would expect. Oh, okay, I'm sorry, I forgot. It's just like you're running it on the REPL. So you have to do this. You have to say, hey, when I call my function, this is what I do. I'll say, hey, this failed. You told me that I was gonna get hi back, but I actually got this. This is a problem, okay? But, okay, if I fix this and run it, now it works. Okay. And what's cool is you can mix documentation with test cases. You say, you know, strings will be capitalized. Okay. And then you can say ints will raise an exception. Okay, and you can actually do exceptions in doctest, although they're a little weird. So, but if you really want to see it's really weird. I decided to go learn it. It basically says, hey, what I got was this traceback, this exception traceback, and so you have to go take this whole thing. And you have to say, that's what you're supposed to get. We can rip out all the middle. Okay. And now it'll be happy with that. It'll say, hey, and you can just mix in some comments here with actually testing out your functions on the REPL. And then you could put this into this could be one of your things that you run in your GitHub Actions script to make sure that your Python is working correctly. Okay. All right, so that's it for Python unit testing from me. Yeah. No, I just replaced it with 3 dots. It's just kind of a weird syntax, but if you want to test exceptions, that's how you do it. So I don't use doctest all over the place, but if you're writing kind of short little functions and you'd like to mix it with the documentation, it's kind of a neat little feature. Yeah.
What are the advantages of the two? Why would you ever do doctest once you learn Pytest? Is there a reason?
Well, so one, I had kind of, I used it for just a really small function that was taking a string and it would turn it to a float sometimes and to an int other times. And the maintainer of the project said, this is kind of a weird little function here that's converting the type. Why don't you just put in a doc thing right in here so that as people read through about how you use the function, it's more apparent. So it's not a full-blown testing infrastructure, but if you have little functions, it's kind of a nice addition. That's how I see it. But
it also documents what the function's supposed to do by showing you what tests should fail and what should succeed.
It helps the reader to see it becomes part of the documentation as well. Yeah. Question?
I was just going to ask about the same thing, like that all shows up in the doc as well.
Yeah, it shows up in the doc. When I used it, it was a combination of both. So Dr. Mangelson's going to show you how to write testing for C code now. This was for Python. So.